Hello and good afternoon to all. A very warm welcome to all of you from my side, as well as from the futurEU team. I want to also welcome our judges, our four first semi-finalist teams, and of course, the wider audience that is now with us on the CIVICA's YouTube channel. Today, I'm honored to be your moderator for this first futurEU competition semifinal. My name is Francesca Minetto, founder of futurEU, and I'm joined here today by the rest of the futurEU team, Cecilia, Mereis, Navera, Ricardo, Victor, and Zoe. They will handle the behind the scenes together with the incredible Hertie digital learning team. Thank you, Jose and Matt. So this is the first edition of our futurEU competition, a competition that truly engaged students in this visionary thought experiment about the future of the European Union. Today, during the first semifinal, 4 of the 8 best teams that made it so far will present their visionary treaty reform for a better European Union. I would like to congratulate all teams on my behalf and on the behalf of the futurEU team. Now it is truly my pleasure to introduce you to our fantastic panel of judges for this first semifinal of the futurEU competition. I will now ask the judges to put their camera on so they can be seen officially live on our YouTube streaming. Hello and welcome all. We're truly honored to have you here with us today. We're honored to be joined here today by Dr. Nicole Koenig, chair of this panel of judges and deputy director of the Jacques Delors Center Berlin. Her areas of expertise include, among others, EU foreign security policy, institutional questions, and migration policy. Thank you, Nicole, for being with us today. And our other 2 judges are Dr. Tu Nguyen, Policy Fellow for EU Institutions and Democracy at the Jacques Delors Center, and Dr. Niels Redeker, Policy Fellow for European Economic Policy at the Jacques Delors Center. Thank you both for joining us today. Well, now I would say that the fun truly begins. We will now have the pleasure to listen to the first semi-finalist team of our futurEU competition. I would like to invite team 8620, meaning Gabriel, Madhumita, and Philip, to take the stage and present their proposal for the future of the EU. I'll ask the judges to put their camera off. Thank you so much. Gabriel, you should now have presenter rights. Please also put your mic on. Great. If you are all set, your 10 minutes will start now.
Can you all hear me? Perfect. Grazie mille, Francesca. Guten Tag and welcome to our presentation. We are Team E8620 and proudly represent the Hertie School in Berlin. In our treaty reform, we want to counter imbalances in access and representation in EU elections by introducing an all-new electoral system and stressing the role of transnational European lists. Today, we are more than happy and honored to present our vision for a stronger, more democratic, and more transparent union. In our presentation, we first are going to lay out our main motivation and subsequently propose a new electoral procedure that introduces a more balanced representation system. Afterwards, we will operationalize the legislative reform and dissect its main components before summarizing our key findings and presenting a roadmap with the next steps. In 2017, Emmanuel Macron's famous Sorbonne speech called for a renewal of the European Union. However, his speech could not have happened at the worst point in time. His revolutionary vision was shadowed by Brexit, Trump, as well as other dramatic crises. Almost 4 years later, however, the time to act has come. We pick up Macron's ball and pursue his vision of a more integrated EU by reforming its electoral system and introducing transnational lists for the 2024 parliamentary elections. But how to proceed? Our treaty reform addresses several issues at once and transforms the EU, making it more democratic and transparent. Looking at the EU election voter turnout, the numbers have been decreasing constantly. Recent elections in 2019, however, indicate a potential for reversal as the turnout increased. This shows that the European vision is not dead yet. Indeed, there is hope for the future. We propose a treaty reform that tackles the EU's legitimacy crisis, renews European representation, enhances EU policymaking, improves European collaboration, and strengthens the European identity. This ultimately paves the way for a bright future of peace and prosperity. So far, nearly all reforms have tried to tackle crises. With Trump and Brexit being history, there is opportunity for a significant reform. However, in order to tackle ongoing challenges such as migration, climate change, populism, and pandemics, we need a stronger union that speaks with one voice. Our reform joins a series of significant changes that have never managed to fully tackle the problems at hand. In order to drive change and truly reform the European Union, we propose a treaty reform that introduces a new electoral system and thereby fosters legitimacy. My colleague Philip will now begin to lay out the process.
Hello, and welcome from my side as well. It is my pleasure to now dig into the core of our proposal, which is introducing a two-vote electoral system. So what do we propose? We deem it a good call to have a system of personalized proportional representation, following the example of the German personalisierte Verhältniswahl. As such, it encompasses two votes, a first vote for the national constituency, which is distributed digressively proportional and guarantees a minimum amount of seats, and a second vote, which regulates the distribution of the leftover seats and allows citizens to vote for European parties only. While the first vote safeguards the interest of the smaller countries, the second vote paves the way for transnational lists. This would mean a huge change, since up to now, European elections are national elections on national issues. That means that I, as a German, can only vote for Germans from German parties, which fundamentally does not make it a European election at all. We are sure that this reform will allow the EU to benefit in several ways. Currently, the EU elections do not differ significantly from national elections, and thus are also perceived as such by the European electorate. This continues to highly bias European politics, since the European perspective of both the candidates and the voters is severely limited during elections. Consequently, the European Parliament functions as a national representation convention rather than a parliament of union. Right now, the voters base their vote to contesting parties on national preferences. Reform is urgently needed at the campaign stage to highlight issues common to the EU as a whole. This protracts to the legislation process, where European parliamentarians are accountable to national constituencies. By giving one vote to transnational lists, the change of perspective in election campaigns and legislation is completed with the creation of truly European parties. This forms heart and base to reiterating the shift from the national domination in the EU system. So far, the European Union is an administrative and abstract institution, hovering over citizens in their nationally focused lives. Already in founding times, however, the idea was to one day establish a truly European and sovereign state. Besides politics and economics, it must be develop a true European identity. And this European demos, this public sphere, shall be advanced by this very plan. I will now hand over to Matumita, who will dig deep into the legislation aspect.
In order to operationalize the proposed reform, they require adaptation into the legislation. This requires the involvement of member states through a standard, not a simplified treaty reform procedure. I step in here to take you through the legislative procedure, and the following slides delve into the amendments proposed in the respective primary and secondary EU sources. What is presented here is a comprehensive presentation of revisions needed in the EU legislative sources. To aid comprehension, the textual detailing is represented individually in the following slides. To explain our reform, we highlight the proposed amendments using the colors red and blue in the following slides. Red is the current phrasing, and the revision we propose is highlighted in blue. Firstly, we incorporate revision in paragraph 39, subsection 1 of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. Through this revision, we aim to modify the interpretation of EU elections from a national to a wider perspective. We need revised conditions to be established for the EU elections to differentiate them from national elections. These conditions may be tailor-made for every member state with the involvement of national representatives. The idea here is to share and make transparent the decision-making process. Another hindrance we observe is the variation of conditions of voting and contesting rights across states of the EU as detailed in the Treaty on the Functioning of European Union in paragraph 22 subsections 1 and 2. We propose to dissolve these differences and make such conditions more standardized across the Union. Coming to the Act of or election of member states of the European Parliament, we revise paragraph 1, subsections 1 and 2. Although the single transferable vote system attempts to achieve proportionality, it severely restricts choice of rankings only within the national constituencies. In many instances, the whole state is a single constituency, limiting choice and efficacy of the voting procedure. Through the highlighted changes, we move from the single transferable vote system to a purely proportional voting mechanism. Our reform guarantees that member states' autonomy remains intact for the first vote. Article 2 in the same Act aims to allow every member state the establishment of constituencies in different manners. We, however, propose to revise the establishment of constituencies based on the number of first vote seats, which is distributed digressively proportional. An exception of the different manner in subdivisions may be possible in special circumstances. Coming to the Article 3 of the Act, we envision an increased role of European Parliament as against member states in setting a minimum threshold for the allocation of seats. This minimum threshold is now applied to the European party lists in the second vote only. The subparagraphs 2 and 3 of this Act were added in the Lisbon Treaty. However, they only regard national specifications, which we, by means of this reform, would like to eliminate. Thus, they will not be replaced. The reforms proposed in this paper have been built on the suggestions and thought exercises from various discussions hitherto. Our draft reform has provided a pragmatic framework for immediate adoption into electoral procedure. Implementing these treaty reforms shall bring an end to the institutional deadlock of the Union and kickstart elevation to a renewed era of the EU. By this, we make the EU accessible to its own citizens, shape its collective identity on the global stage. On that note, we thank the Hertie School, Jacques Delors Center Berlin, CIVICA Alliance, and fellow futurEU organizing committee members for enabling us this platform to present our reform for the future of EU. It has been an enjoyable and insightful journey, and we hope to come back tomorrow to present our reform one last time. Thank you. That's the end of our presentation. We can now take questions.
Well, thank you so much for your timekeeping. Great job. Thank you for proposing such an interesting proposal in terms of reforming the EU electoral law. I would now invite the judges to put their camera on. You currently have the floor. Team, I remind you that as soon as the judges finish asking their questions, you'll have 5 minutes to give your replies. You'll see Maris pop up again with a yellow and red card. Thank you.
Well, perhaps I'll start. Thank you very much for your very interesting proposal and presentations. We discussed already internally. We have 2 questions. So I'll hand over to Niels for the first question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks also from my side. This was a very engaging presentation. The main question I had when reading your paper is how the system you propose is able to fix the problems you outlined. So what is your thinking on why the electoral reform that you suggest will actually decrease issues such as populism or low voter turnout throughout Europe? And to what extent does this proposal really bring voters closer to the election procedure? If I can vote for a person from Cyprus now, being someone in Germany, how does this help me connect to the EU, given that very likely I won't know this person at all, and it's going to be hard for me to understand where this person comes from and what he stands or she stands for? That would be my question.
So maybe I continue directly with the second question we had. Also from my side, thank you very much for this very interesting proposal. It's very timely, of course, with elections coming up in 3 years. My question is more on the practical side of your proposal. So how do you envision how the seats will be distributed generally in the system? So how will they be distributed amongst political parties? How are they distributed among the member states? How are they distributed between the first and the second vote? I think it wasn't quite clear to me what the relation is between the one and the other, because you mentioned that it is based on the German system, but of course the German system is overall proportional representation system based on the second vote. So how does that work in the proposal that you have now, where you divide it between the first and second vote? And also what happens to parties that are not affiliated to a European political group? How does that work between the first and the second vote? So it's really more of a practical question as to, have you thought about how it would play out in practice if we were to implement this reform? Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. We'll get to answer them one by one, if that's okay. And Gabriel, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me if I talk like that? Yeah, perfect. Let me answer the first question, how this system is going to fix the problems that we mentioned in our introduction. So first of all, I think that populism and distrust in politics is one big issue that we have to consider, and one big issue that our proposal considers. By having European lists, we try to address European issues on a European level and try to avoid that the European elections become one additional national election. By being more transparent and enabling more democracy on a European level, we tackle populism and tackle distrust in European politics. And maybe to add on this, we also enable the creation of a European public sphere by having European topics for the elections. We can then also have European media and European discussions on a European level in order to really discuss what is crucial in our everyday lives in the European Union. So Philip, you might want to add on that.
For the second question, this is, of course, we thought about that, a very political question. We are quite aware that the proposal that we put forward is a critical one regarding establishing it as a actual reform of the European Union. So that means every national state will obviously have an interest in having the share of the national votes as high as possible. So this is something that there is no specific answer to, but it needs to, ideally, it would go towards 50-50 or maybe 80-20 regarding the votes of the transnational lists. But of course, in the end, how this is implemented is the question. Regarding your question, how this will work out if some national parties are different from transnational parties, from European parties, we also thought about that. And that means that every national party would, of course, need to be registered in the European Parliament or in the European Union as a European party as well. And if there is no such thing as a European entity party-wise that represents that national party, it could go forward and just be included and have then its own new party shell, so to say. Do you have anything to add on that?
I don't have any additions, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would say to the judges, if you have one more questions, the team might have a few minutes. If not, we will then proceed with our second semi-finalist.
Maybe a quick question
Yes.
from my side as well on the timing. So you mentioned in the paper that this is now the right moment to do it and to introduce it before the German and the French election. But we wondered a bit whether this is really a good moment, considering that treaty revision would take time and that perhaps after the election would be a better moment.
If I can quickly take that question, we did think about it. We thought this was most important right now, especially because with elections around in 2024, it's important to address. And as we were preparing for this, we also saw how vaccination was turning out in EU, which makes it more important for integration to happen. So with respect to everything, we think it needs to step from the elections, like when I, as a citizen, start voting, that's when I need to feel more European. So everything I think about in a much more broader scale. So I think that would fix a lot of issues, including identity issues, integration issues, and probably even supply chain issues. So which is why we think now is the right time. And through our presentation, the now has become even more enlarged, I would say. So yes.
Thank you very much to our first semi-finalist team. I will now ask the judges to switch your camera off, and it is my pleasure to invite to the stage our second team. So I call team 9562, Catalina, Michal, Alina, and Nirosha. Nirosha? You should now have presenting rights. Yes. I believe Jose is putting your presentation.
Okay.
Great. If you are all set, then you have 10 minutes and it starts now.
Hello everyone, I'm Nirosha Varghese, representing team 9652 along with Mikal, Diana and Alina from Bocconi University. I, myself and Mikal are from public policy and Diana and Alina are from legal studies. Now I'll be presenting our policy brief titled Fairly Random Unblocking the Rule of Law Proceedings Through Random Selection of Voting Member States in the European Council. To provide a brief context of the issue that we raise in our policy brief, I'll start with the rule of law, which is enshrined in one of the founding treaties of the European Union, which is Article 2. And it states that the Union is founded on the values of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, respect for human rights, including the right of persons belonging to minorities. In the recent years, some member states of the European Union have adopted a wide range of reforms that has affected the fundamental rights, the democratic participation, and the rule of law. They have also adopted reforms that has affected the independence of judiciary. For example, reforms that has mandated early retirement of higher court judges or reforms that has enabled a system of disciplinary proceedings against them. This independence of judiciary matters for the legal order of not just each individual member state, but for EU as a whole. For example, the preliminary reference proceedings under Article 267 TFEU allocates space for dialogue between national judges and the European Court and the Court of Justice of the European Union. So if the national judges are not independent or impartial, they may not refer cases to the Court of Justice of European Union when they have to. And this can have serious spillover effects on the EU democracy and citizen rights. Because of this, the academic literature has been talking about the rule of law backsliding as a key existential challenge for the EU legal order. So it's not just a political concern anymore, it is also a concern for the law. Now, this rule of law issue, it's not a new phenomenon. It has been around for a long time. But it was only in 2012 that the President of the European Commission acknowledged it as an issue. Also, the European Commission and the European Council has put in place several instruments to deal with this. For example, the 2014 Rule of Law Framework or the Annual Rule of Law Dialogue. There is also the possibility of launching the infringement proceedings as per Article 258 TFEU. But none of them has been sufficiently effective in responding to this constitutional crisis. One such legal provision is the preventive and the sanctioning mechanism provided under Article 7 of the Treaty of European Union. Article 7 can be applied when there are situations of concern that may pose a threat to the rule of law. This is also known as the nuclear option because when implemented, this may suspend membership rights, including voting. And our policy brief focuses on a potential reform of this procedure. So what's the problem with this procedure? First of all, this is a highly symbolic process and involves several stages, as can be seen from this diagram.
The proposal for this procedure is initiated either by 1/3 of the member states or the European Commission. Then the member state in breach has the opportunity to explain themselves by providing observations. This then goes to the European Parliament, from where a consent is required, and then to the European Council. And the voting process in the European Council is highly political because the head of the member states can form political alliances. Also, the requirement of unanimity in the European Council can create a deadlock which might block the procedure. Also, this political paralysis of Article 7 might encourage bad behavior among member states. For example, if one member state is in breach, then the other member states might be tempted to follow a similar behavior because they know that the member state in breach would never vote against them. To overcome this deadlock, we propose a change to the European Council's unanimity requirement of Article 7 to declare the existence of a breach of rule of law. And we do this by applying sortition to the decision-making process, where 1/3 of the European Council would be randomly selected to vote, and this decision would be taken by unanimity. We believe that this is the best possible way forward because, one, the unanimity requirement is impossible to meet in practice. Two, a random selection of the voting members would mean that the member state in breach would never know who is voting, and this would prevent conflicts of interest and political alliances. Three, sortition is a compromise between unanimity and qualified majority, and because of this, it is an effective solution. And finally, the modification would not involve a major overhaul of the mechanism of Article 7. Now, my colleague Diana will explain this proposal in more detail.
Well, I would like to explain how our proposal works. So to start, our reform does not modify the legitimacy of the sanction mechanism contained in Article 7.2, because we keep the two steps that are contained there. So first, the countries concerned would still have the right to submit observations before the decision, and then the Parliament's consent is still required. On the other hand, we also keep the unanimity as a requirement for the decision of the European Council. And we will leave the sanction contained in Article 7.3, which is the last step of this procedure and which is the main objective of this sanction mechanism, as it is now. Therefore, the Council of the European Union will still have the possibility to suspend membership rights. Then, on the other hand, what our proposal really modifies is the number of countries voting. So currently, with the system as it is now, we will have 26 countries, and then with this proposal, we will have only 9, meaning, as my colleague was mentioning before, that we will have 1/3, and it will be chosen by sortition. Now, I will mention some other advantages of our proposal. So, in this proposal, we have that the member state that will be randomly selected will have to explain their vote. This is very important in our proposal because it will help to increase transparency. It will also give more visibility to the proceedings because currently it's very difficult to know what is going on with Article 7 proceedings. And it will also allow the European Union citizens know why and how their politicians are working on certain issues such as the rule of law. Moreover, as I was mentioning before, we don't have any modification on the Parliament's role. This is also very important because in this particular case, to give consent, the Parliament needs 2/3 of the cast of the vote cast, and also it needs absolute majority, meaning that the European Union citizens are still represented. And then we also have that the voting will be done immediately after the lot, meaning that we will have the European Council meeting, then we will have the lot, and immediately after, in order to avoid, as my colleague was saying, political alliances and conflicts of interest, immediately after they will have to vote. And then this vote that will be given to the randomly selected countries will be only for a limited period of time, meaning that this vote will be valid only for the proceeding that has been initiated. If we have a new proceeding concerning the same country or a new proceeding concerning another one, we will have a new lot and a new set of countries. Now, my colleague Michal will explain the possibilities of our proposal.
So now you're probably wondering what outcomes do we expect from this new procedure. Here we show the results of simulations of 4 different voting rules that could be adopted in the European Council for different scenarios with different numbers of member states who would prefer to veto the procedure launched in accordance with the Article 7. Here you see what is the probability of veto in each of those cases. When you look at the blue triangles that represent the current state, you see that it's not a problem if we have 0 or even 1 member state that breaks the rule of law, because the other countries can, by unanimity, vote to launch the procedure. But as soon as we have 2 or more member states who are breaking the rule of law or allying with that country, this probability jumps to 100%. So the procedure is stuck, is blocked. On the other hand, when you look at the bottom, at the black diamonds, qualified majority voting doesn't allow to block this procedure in even 3 countries or even more, depending on their size, if they are against the procedure. So we propose a solution to this trade-off between unanimity and feasibility and the capacity of deterrence, which is the random selection of 1/3 of the member states. And we prefer 1/3 over, for example, 1/2. First, because it offers greater capacity of deterrence, and second, because this number already appears in Article 7 and in the treaties in other places. So this has been our proposal for breaking the deadlock in the European Council. Thank you very much for your attention, and we are happy to answer your questions.
Thank you to our second semi-finalist team for the very interesting proposal on reforming Article 7. Of course, now I would like to give the floor to our panel of judges to come in and ask the team their questions.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I start this time. Thank you also to your team for this proposal. I think, again, it's a very timely one. And of course, a very much discussed topic also in policy and academia, what to do with Article 7. And I think you have a very innovative approach. On the issue, the question I have is about the random 1/3 member states that would be free voting on in the procedure with unanimity. So our question is, first of all, why is that better than qualified majority voting, or is it not sort of the same in terms of there's only a certain number of member states that need to be voting for it? And the second question is, would a unanimity requirement not sort of continue the same problem? So yes, it's not all of the member states, but again, as soon as there is one member state that doesn't want to vote in favor of sanctions, we have the exact same problem as we have under the current Article 7, and that the member state can veto it. So why even give member states the possibility to veto instead of introducing qualified majority voting or reverse qualified majority voting or any other kind of qualified majority voting, really, where veto can be overcome by the other member states?
Yeah, thank you also very much from my side. This is really one of the key issues for the European Union, so that's really spot on in terms of being timely. And just linking also to what Tu said, on the one hand, I wonder if we think about all that we have seen about the rule of law mechanism, rule of law conditionality, and the difficulties of passing that proposal. One of the questions is, of course, how feasible is your proposal? How likely is it that the member states would collectively say, we entrust this decision to a fraction of member states, making the decision perhaps less legitimate, as Tu said. And the other question is, so you say, because there is a random selection, we will have less coalitions. But is it not actually that we would have broader coalitions of member states and a broader group of member states that would tie themselves to each other to say, if you get into the group, then please vote against that?
Thank you so much. I think I will start. I think the two questions are somehow linked. So I'd like to start from the bigger one that was posed last. So basically, how does this affect the legitimacy of the European Union and of the institutions, and also taking into account that there are other issues, other mechanisms on the rule of law. So we propose to change. So the procedure in Article 7 involves many institutions, and we propose to change just the penultimate stage of it. So what's very important that I would like to draw on to what Catalina was saying, that the Parliament is still involved in this, and and indeed the vote in the European Council that we are discussing here does not reach that stage if the Parliament does not allow it. So one set of legitimacy checks is ticked there. And then a little bit more on the mechanism itself. So with what we are proposing, we reduce this control of the process by some of the member states. So of course, it does not take out all political alliances, but the fact that there is no time to build the time they actually, like Catalina explained, the voting is going to take place immediately. So we do not allow time-wise for member states to align their decisions and to influence each other. It's not magic. It's not a miracle solution, but at the same time, it actually provides some solutions. And maybe my colleagues would like to expand a little bit more on why is this better than qualified majority.
Yes, I will be happy to expand on this. I think the second question partially answers the first question, that introduction of qualified majority voting would be very hard to accept for many other countries. So we propose a compromise between unanimity and qualified majority. As for the question on broader groups, broader coalitions, I think that if we assume that there may be, for example, a coalition of 9 countries or of 5 countries that would vote and absolve each other ex ante from any wrongdoings, then the European Union as such is doomed to fail. I think if there is no cooperation and no goodwill among all those countries, all countries, or there is no common understanding of what are the values in the Article 2, then no voting rule will change it. Qualified majority will not solve this problem. And finally, what is the advantage of our proposal? That currently, if we have one member state that is already breaking the rules, breaking the Article 2 values, then others have an incentive to follow the path, right? And if we introduce this random model, those countries cannot be sure that they will, and that this small coalition of 2 or maybe 3 countries will work, because still there is a large probability that those countries will not be selected, and that the Article 7 procedure will not be blocked.
Thank you to the team for your answers. Nicole, did you have a follow-up? No, I saw you. Great. Then I want to thank this team again for your proposal. And I would like to invite team 6748 to join us. Paolo, Maria Francesca, Gaia, and Pietro. Please come on stage to present your proposal on the future of the EU. Great. I believe Paolo is the presenter, and I will change that.
I think I received the presenter's rights. It should be Maria Francesca.
Yes, I'm changing that.
Thank you.
Well, now if you are all set, as per usual, you have 10 minutes.
Now. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to our presentation. We are also first students from Bocconi University, but we are the junior team as we are all enrolled in the third year of a Bachelor of Science in International Economics and Management. We are proposing a solution to the European dilemma of spelling unity without accountability, amending Article 7 of the Treaty of the European Union as to enable the European Parliament to bind membership to the upholding of Copenhagen criteria. We would like to start with a quote from Umberto Eco that underlines the principle and the aim of the European Union. It is culture, not war, that cements European identity. In fact, we believe that the strength of the European Union actually relies upon its value. Without a common identity, the entire European project will be deprived of its purpose. However, what does actually European identity mean though? It consists of a set of core values that are shared among all the member states. The fundamental values are enlisted in the Copenhagen criteria, which were established in 1993 and are the assessment principles used in order to determine whether a candidate country could be awarded European membership. The criteria are of three types: political criteria, ensuring stable institutions that can guarantee democracy, respect of the rule of law, respect of human rights, and protection of minorities. The economic criteria, ensuring the functioning market economy that is capable of coping with competitive pressure and market forces within the European Union. And finally, administrative capacity, the incorporation of the acquis communautaire and the adherence to the various political, economic, and monetary aims of the European Union.
What our work tries to solve is the paradox of the compliance with the Copenhagen criteria that is required through the application process. However, once a country has joined the European Union, it is no longer obliged to respect the European values it had to uphold to become a member. The underlying assumption is that it was assumed that the EU membership, with all related economic and cultural benefits deriving from the four fundamental freedoms, was enough to ensure that a candidate country would keep respecting these values following its entrance. However, as we've seen, especially in recent times, this assumption proved to be false. Violations of the Copenhagen criteria. As a matter of fact, member states have repeatedly infringed the Copenhagen criteria, either through sporadic violations, as we've seen with the Moria refugee camp in Lesbos, Greece, or through systematic violations, as highlighted by the current situation and over concerns of rule of law in member states such as Hungary and Poland. The problem is that governmental misbehaviors are contrary to European core values and may entail devastating consequences on the future of the EU as a result of a potential loss of identity. If we violate the rule of law and do not respect human rights and do not protect minorities, who are we as Europeans then? Another question that we want to discuss is, why do violations take place? There are two factors allowing member states misbehavior. The first is that there is no occasion for the EU to reassess compliance with the Copenhagen criteria following accession. And the second we found to be responsible was the unanimity rule in the Council, which makes it relatively easy for a member state to form a coalition willing to vote against any potential sanction between each other in exchange for reciprocal political favors, as in the case with the Poland and Hungary. While talking about Article 7, it has a procedure related to the violations of the fundamental EU principles by member states. And it is Article 7 of the Treaty of the European Union, whose modality is described also in Article 354, the Treaty of the Function of the European Union. However, this article has been proven to be ineffective, also by what the concerns of the previous groups that we've seen, because it requires unanimity or quasi-unanimity in the Council to be activated, and has some very highly disruptive sanctions right away, which strongly disincentivize its use.
Precisely. So, having clearly identified the problem, we then came up with a solution that consists in amending Article 7 and the related Article 354 in order to implement a twofold policy change. Firstly, we believe that the assessment of Copenhagen criteria should be carried out on a continuous basis. And secondly, we also believe that the Parliament should be given the power to activate an infringement procedure in the case a member state was found in violation of the criteria. More specifically, the Parliament would be given the power to declare the state of infringement. And after that, both the Parliament and the Council would have to vote in order to begin the actual procedure. In that case, a simple majority would be required in Parliament and qualified majority would be needed in the Council. If such majority is reached, then the member state will have to present evidence against the Parliament of not being guilty of the accusations of criteria violation. Hence, the process works like a trial, with the Parliament being the jury. And therefore, it is the Parliament that decides based on an absolute majority. And if the member state is found guilty, the decision will have to be confirmed by the Council through a qualified majority. It is important to note that the simple initialization of the procedure does not entail immediate penalization. The country has to present an improvement plan that will allow it to meet again the criteria within a certain time frame. This plan has to be approved by both the Parliament and the Council. At the end of the previously defined time frame, a renewed assessment is made, and if the member state fails to meet the criteria again, the Parliament can either decide to extend the time frame or to apply escalating penalties, in this case with the approval of the Council. For example, after the end of a one-year time frame, the Parliament might apply a reduction of the EU funds that would have been allocated to the country in that period. After 2 years instead, there might be a full suspension of funds, and after 3 years, the time frame might be extended again, but with a disenfranchisement of the voting rights within the Council. The final step of the procedure entails the possibility to expel the country if it is still violating the criteria. To do so, absolute majority in Parliament and unanimity in Council are necessary. It is important to note that the unanimity rule is retained here in order to make the event of an actual expulsion of a member state only a remote possibility. The retainment of unanimity at this final stage would somehow represent a compromise with respect to the current Article 7 procedure because complete deletion is avoided.
So you recommended the establishment of an institutional infringement procedure within the European Union because it would deny the possibility for member states to find support in the Council to avoid any consequences related to the infringement of European values. It would also shift decision-making power partially from the Council to the Parliament, and it would act as a deterrent to behave accordingly to Copenhagen criteria while hardly leading to actual expulsion of a member state. We acknowledge that there are potential drawbacks to actual reform. So, for instance, member states could be reluctant to transfer additional powers to the Parliament or to be accountable to it. Also, member states could use the existence of such a procedure to foment anti-EU sentiments within the national territories. An alternative to our reform could be then, for instance, to amend Article 7 by simply substituting unanimity rule with qualified majority votes regarding internal sanctions, with the exception of expulsion of a member state. However, this policy will fail to provide the EU Parliament with the possibility of making its voice heard, and we believe that the role of the Parliament in the EU is fundamental. So why do we choose this specific trio reform? So the first reason of the two is that we believe that the respective rule of law strongly affects the future of the EU. And the reason is that violations of democratic principles do not just concern the member state where they take place, but they shake the very foundations of the European project. So the disrespectful rule of law could undermine the principle of mutual trust among member states, potentially having repercussions in mutual recognition between judicial systems. And also, the other reason is that, differently from other treaty reforms that are also necessary and important in the EU, in this particular reform, treaties are totally standing in the way of progress when it comes to rule of law. In fact, Article 7 of the Treaty of the European Union represents a deadlock and a tremendous danger for the EU as a value-based entity and therefore as a global leader. So, thank you for your attention, and we'll be glad to answer all your questions.
Thank you to our third semi-finalist, Tim, for this interesting proposal. I see the judges are already popping up. You now have time to ask your question to the students. And team, you have 5 minutes to present your answers.
Great. Then I'll start this time. Thank you very much for the paper, and thank you also for the presentation. You are really engaging in a critical question here, so it was great fun to listen to you and to read the paper. One question that I had is on the criteria on an infringement of the market economy principle. I was wondering, what kind of infringements are you thinking about there? What kind of situation would you deem to be against the principle of market economy? My concern is that this is a very broad concept, and you could think about very different ways, right? And for example, do you think that countries that do not comply with the Stability and Growth Pact are violating this principle and should be potentially kicked out of the EU by the European Parliament, which sounds like a harsh idea. So I was wondering, what's your thinking on this point?
Yeah, thank you also very much from my side. Again, this issue of backsliding very much connected to the last paper. Very important, and we have seen reforms also in the enlargement process that go in this direction. My question concerns, so there's this question that Niels posed on the criteria. What are actually these criteria? And then what struck me is that you use this term of infringement, which is usually reserved to the European Court of Justice. And this is an ongoing discussion that the European Court of Justice can only rule on these EU values in case the member state, when it violates these EU values, also violates EU law at the same time. So it's extremely restrictive. So my question would really be, what exact changes would that require legally? Because I think they're quite far-reaching, also because they include the possibility of throwing out an EU member state. And maybe final point, you mentioned that unanimity is in the end the rule for this exclusion. Maybe we are repeating here a little bit the nuclear option of Article 7 by making it based on the unanimous decision of the member states.
Yeah, I think Paolo's connection. Okay, he's back.
Yeah, here. So I can answer the first question that was asked by Niels Rediker. And so generally, we in our paper, in our proposal, we decided not to become ourselves the judges of the criteria, meaning that we saw this path of the criteria were already assessed for the accession of into the European Union. So generally, we thought that if a country has complied already, so we're already judged by European institutions to have a market economy, then we believe that.
I think we lost him. Should I continue? Okay. Yeah, no, I think Paolo was saying that the idea was that these countries have been able. These countries have been able to be judged before entering the country by the institutions and all various criteria, and we would extend this process to become a yearly review, which is something the Commission already does often enough with the collaboration of member states. They do always release some papers about the state of the rule of law in the European Union, collaborating with the legal system, for example. And I think it's quite common on all these fronts already, but it's never been exactly turned into a binding situation. And for the second question, I think that's a great question in terms of if it would have to be between be left to the Parliament as a jury, or the European Court of Justice should be involved. I think that's something that we can think about working on. But the idea was that there is some sort of collaboration between the EU legal systems. Again, when we saw these works by the Commission, that they put everything together in big yearly reports and then present it to the European Union. But I think the competencies of the Parliament might not be as specific or exactly in line with the European Court of Justice. So that I think that's something that we can think about modifying for the future. Thank you for that question.
If I if I can add something, like we still leave the final absolute majority just like for the last step. But what we hope is that like this proposal will actually never allow us to arrive and to reach that point, because there are a lot of steps before that will allow states to actually get better and to allow them to see the benefits of being in the European Union, that will actually make them restructure the state, in such a way to respect all the criteria. So we actually really hope that it is a final line that we are not going to reach, and actually that proposal can help to structure a stronger European Union also on that side. So we don't really want to kick out any state.
I would like to thank the team for their answers. And I would suggest that we move to our last and fourth semi-finalist team. I invite Neslihan and Elena to join me here on stage to present their idea for EU treaty reform. I believe, Elena, you now have presenter rights. If you are both set and ready to go, you have 10 minutes starting now.
Thank you, Francesca. Good afternoon, everyone. We are happy to close this first semi-final of the futurEU competition with our policy proposal, which carries the title, How to Match EU Legislation with Local Realities, a legally enshrined position for the Committee of the Regions.
We are Neslihan Altun and Elena Schulz-Rotenberg, and we both study public policy, but at different universities. I studied at the Hertie School, and Elena is a student at Sciences Po.
In times of the COVID-19 pandemic, regions and cities have become the front and center of effective policymaking. It is there where politicians explain the rapidly changing decisions to the citizens, and it is there where the measures are implemented in accordance with local realities. But this is not only true in states of emergency like the one we're experiencing now. Many of the central challenges of our times, such as climate change, digitalization, or socioeconomic inequality, have a strong territorial dimension and thus require regionally differentiated solutions. Facts speak for this pivotal role of Europe's regions. 70% of all EU legislation is implemented by regional and local governments. 2/3 of all public investment is governed by the regional and local authorities. And they also implement 90% of all climate adaptation policies. Inside of these figures, we decided the institutional body which represents regional and local actors at the EU level, namely the Committee of the Regions, has to be reformed. What is the committee's current standing within the EU's institutional framework? The treaties assign it two main functions. First, it is used as a source of expertise in the EU legislature. The committee is asked by the Commission, the Council, or the Parliament to draft mandatory opinions in areas of particular regional concern, such as cohesion policy, climate change, transport, or education. Above that, the EU institutions can demand voluntary consultations, if they deem it necessary. And finally, the committee can intervene through own initiative opinions. The second main function of the COR is to act as guardian of subsidiarity. Since the adoption of the Lisbon Treaty, the committee has the right to institute proceedings before the Court of Justice to ensure compliance with the subsidiarity principle. It can do so when a legislation has already been adopted. That means ex post. Moreover, what is an important task of the committee but remains barely formalized is its contribution to the impact assessments carried out by the Commission. To make this clear for the broader audience, impact assessments are evaluations of different policy options which help to determine their added value in the pre-proposal phase. You're still muted.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry. So, based on its current mandate, the Committee of the Regions cannot live up to the requirements of today's political challenges. We argue that it's deficient at several points. First of all, whether its recommendations are recognized and acted upon fully depends on the discretion of the Commission and the co-legislators. According to a study, among all addressees of the Committee of the Regions' opinions, 40% answered they would completely ignore the advice. This implies an incredible waste of resources and missed potential for better lawmaking. Secondly, the option to draft own initiative opinions looks great on paper, but it has actually been used very little in the past due to its political nature. Thus, in practice, the Committee of the Regions has very limited tools to advocate for actions it considers as imperative. It lacks political room for maneuver. Thirdly, the committee faces a time disadvantage in the legislative procedure. Since the committee receives the legislative proposals at the same time as the co-legislators, it is very common that it fails to provide advice at the same time where Parliament and Council are still receptive for it. Fourthly, even though the Committee of the Regions is occasionally asked by the Commission to take part in its impact assessment procedure, this contribution is insufficiently formalized and again depends on the discretion of the Commission. And lastly, the right of referral to the European Court of Justice for judicial review of a legislative proposal only allows the committee a true monitoring of the subsidiarity principle after the legislation has been already adopted. Hence, what is absent is formalized ex ante scrutiny. Our proposal aims at tackling these shortcomings.
Our first reform proposal aims at the legal appreciation of the committee as partner of the Commission in the impact assessment procedure. We want this cooperation to be more than an exchange of annual reports and infrequent hearings requested by the Commission. Even though the impact assessment, as laid out in the Agreement on Better Lawmaking, is stated as the central tool to ensure adherence to subsidiarity and proportionality, the COR is not once mentioned as participating stakeholder. At present, the only legal basis is the cooperation agreement between both institutions. Unfortunately, also this text remains ambiguous and is insufficient in its scope. Therefore, we propose that the right of mandatory legislative consultation in a defined amount of policy areas should be extended to allow for mandatory pre-legislative consultation. This would not only give the committee the right for ex ante examination of the impact of union legislation, it would also offset the time disadvantage the committee has later in the legislative procedure. Finally, we argue that this new right should be institutionally flanked by a seat for the COR in the Regulatory Scrutiny Board, which reviews the Commission's impact assessments.
All right. Our second proposal aims to entitle the Committee of the Regions to consult the European Parliament on taking legislative initiative. In order to do so, we suggest equipping the committee with a proactive rather than with an auditing function. Therefore, the committee should acquire the right to advise the European Parliament on taking legislative initiative. What does that mean? This would mean that the Committee of the Regions would be entitled to draft consultative initiative reports in the areas of mandatory and defined consultation. In turn, the Parliament should be obliged to inform the committee about reasons for not acting upon its recommendations. This justification should be enforceable in front of the European Court of Justice. The mechanism will be comparable to Article 225 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. However, the committee gets the legally protected right to consult and not the indirect right to initiate a legislative act. In sum, This innovation will foster the cooperation between the Parliament and the Committee by formally and legally aligning them towards a common goal, which is effective and place-based policies. And with this proposal, we not only build an institutional alliance, but we also give the Committee an option for proactive engagement. In the long run, we believe this will strengthen the Parliament's indirect influence on the political agenda of the European Union instead of undermining it. By making the voice of the people in Europe stronger, we are convinced this step would finally be a tool to regain trust in the EU. To conclude, we propose a two-tier reform. First, we demand a fully fledged formalization of the Committee's contribution to the Commission's impact assessments. Secondly, we want to endow the Committee of the Regions with a pioneering option for proactive engagement in alliance with the European Parliament. With these two ideas, we unite the consultative and the political representative role of this body. And we also approach the fourth scenario of the Commission's white paper on the future of Europe, entitled Doing Less, More Effectively. What sets our proposal apart is that it is realistic, it is proportional, it is proactive, and it is needed now.
That being said, thank you very much for your attention and your consideration for Europe's regions.
Thank you, Neslihan. Thank you, Elena. I see the judges are already coming in. The judges will now present their questions to you, and you have the 5 minutes to answer them.
Okay, then I go first. Thank you very much for this great paper and the interesting proposal. You have totally sold me on the point that the current status of the institution should be changed. So I'm on board with that. The main question that I had is, how do you avoid, like in general, you probably wouldn't, there are few people that would argue that there is a lack of institutions at the European level. So how do you avoid, by adding another layer of consultation and cooperation, making things even slower at the European level? So that would be my first question. Tui, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you. Thank you also from my side for this proposal. I thought it was very, very interesting. And I think the question of how to involve the national level and the regional level is always a very great one to look at. My question is maybe a bit similar in the questions, in Niels' questions direction, in the direction of Niels' question. So you also mentioned that by reforming the Committee of the Regions, you would like to contribute to regaining trust in the EU and to have well, build more trust in the citizens level into the EU, as far as I understand you correctly. But then my question is, how do you imagine that would work if nobody knows what the Committee of the Region is? So you're right, and you yourself write in your policy brief that 90% of the Europeans do not know how the committee works or what it is. So how would improving a committee or the status of a committee contribute to raising trust in the EU if nobody even knows that there's a lack of status perhaps for this institution? And how do you sell this to the citizens? Because of course treaty amendments are also about selling it to the citizens, to the Europeans, that this is what we need right now, that this is the reform that will make the EU a better one and make the Union a more democratic one. How do you sell this reform to Europeans if there's only 10% of them knowing what you are even talking about when you say the Committee of the Regions? Thank you.
Let me add a third question, which builds on the other two questions. Basically, if we sell that to the citizens, can you mention an example of how it would have good influence, visible influence on a particular policy topic, or an example where it should have had influence, but it didn't have influence because of the current setup?
Okay, I start with the first question. So as we interpret our proposal, it's not about adding a new layer of consultation, adding more cumbersome or creating a more cumbersome process, but rather stopping the waste of resources that is currently happening due to the fact that actually the committee drafts opinions, but nobody reads them. So we think there needs to be an institutional incentive for the other institutions to take the committee's opinions into account. That would be my answer to the first question. Neslihan, maybe you would like to take the second question on trust.
I mean, okay. Thank you for your comments and for your question. How do we imagine to improve the trust or to sell this idea to the citizen? Well, our initial idea is that European Union, like the European Parliament, is the voice of the people, represents the voice of the people by political groups. They are organizing political groups, and the Committee of the Regions has the same power dynamics. They are also organizing political groups, which means they represent the specific capacity from the regions and local authorities there. And we thought this both institutions who have the similar power dynamics could go hand in hand, because they represent the people and they echo a vision of the bottom-up democracy. So once the Committee of the Regions starts to have more influence in this proceedings and in this pre-proposal legislative procedures, for example, it will be also. We also believe that this will alter the mindset of the people, because so far we have only this European Parliament, which is it's a huge institution, which is almost really difficult to touch. But at the same point, there will be people or politicians in their areas making more the voice of the local authorities more visible, while they're trying to present this new reform. And so the narrative will change, the framing will change, their political campaigns will change as well. So in the long run, they will put more effective, they will change narrative and the idea of this institution. And we believe that this institution is really close to the citizen, and but it's underestimated.
Exactly. And okay. So we believe visibility will follow institutionalization of what we propose. And then the last question, a concrete example, is actually the one we're experiencing now. The EU has given money to the nation states, but it doesn't end up in the regions where it's needed to put up the vaccination centers and to tackle this health crisis. So the money is there, but it doesn't go through to the local area, it doesn't end up where it should be. So that would be a very concrete, very recent example where we see that actually regional expertise and the knowledge of how policies are implemented on the ground, why this is so indispensable and important and needs to be recognized.
Recognized with local realities, of course, from the EU to the local realities. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Neslihan. Thank you, Elena. I would like to thank all teams and congratulate them on their proposal and their incredible timekeeping, which means that we're perfectly on time. This closes the presentation part of our first semifinal of the futurEU competition. We will now be sending the judges to a separate room to deliberate and take a decision on the finalist team, and I imagine it will be a difficult decision to take. For all the others, we will be having a 15 minutes coffee break, which means that I will invite you back in at 5:05 p.m. Now, Jose will be sending the judges to a breakout room. Thank you all for your time. Welcome back. The judges should soon be with us again. I believe this is the most weighted announcement for our semi-finalist teams, who must have had very rough 15 minutes. Yet, before we allow the judges to make the big announcement, I would like to ask all of the students to come on camera so that we can take a short virtual picture of this incredible semi-final. So please join us on the stage. Great. Are we all here? Okay, I'll give us a 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1, go. Thank you all so much for this. Thank you for your time. Now the big announcement comes. I'll ask all students to close their camera and I'll leave the floor to the panel of judges.
Yeah, thank you very much, Francesca. It's a very smart move to take this picture before this great announcement, so everybody still looks fresh. Yeah, and thank you, first of all, also to you and the whole team for this excellent organization of the competition. We so far had a lot of fun, and yeah, thank you, of course, above all, to all of the student teams for what we thought were really good policy briefs. Of course, we read all of them. You were already a selection of them. And I think the reason why we selected these papers was really because they were creative, because they were tackling really important issues for the future of the EU, because they were well written, because they were based on very interesting proposals that are already out there. And I think what we saw now in your presentations is that this impression was confirmed. And on top of that, we thought that we are all really excellent presenters. And you presented within time, and you had very good graphics illustrating your proposals. So I see a lot of potential for future think tankers amongst all of you. So that said, of course, there can only be one winner, one winning team in the semi-final that will then meet the other winning team tomorrow. And we had a very tough round of discussion amongst ourselves, because on the one hand, we have in think tanks or in policy briefs often like that, you have some of the very topical pressing issues that everybody's looking at, the rule of law, the backsliding, issues of democracy, we could see that. But we also sometimes have topics in policy briefs which are overlooked and which maybe are a little bit in the shadows, but actually have a lot of potential. And this is actually influenced a lot our decision towards the proposal of Elena Nessihan about the Committee of the Regions, because we thought that this was, on the one hand, extremely well written. You used empirical evidence very well. You really knew the topic well. So when I was reading that, I thought, okay, these two are really experts on this topic. And we also think that this is an issue that is entirely overlooked. And the role of the regions will be more important in the future. And this is a key issue also for bringing together the supranational and the people, sort of local spheres, which have an important role. You mentioned the pandemic, but you could also think of other things such as migration and the role of communes there. And so, yeah, congratulations very much on this proposal. We look forward to hearing you again on this proposal, and we would like to give you 3 pointers on perhaps what you could look at for tomorrow, and perhaps if you then make it tomorrow, also beyond that. So first of all, this question that we all had a bit is how to sell this proposal. So if we think that this proposal goes into the conference on the future of Europe, for example, if citizens should be interested in this proposal, we should really think about how to make this proposal a bit more appealing, a bit more sexy for the broader audience. it's a technical issue. We think it's an extremely relevant issue, but you'd have to sell it a bit more. Then, as we said, examples. So what you have very good data illustrating that basically nobody really knows this this committee, but it would be really great if you could have some examples where it did play a role and where it should have played a role. So what we mentioned in the questions. And finally, the issue always with a bit technical proposals is, in your case, you make a very strong case for making that realistic, which is good, but we would push you a bit more to also think a bit more ambitiously. And what you could do, and what is common also in the policy brief, to say, okay, there are different scenarios. There's the continued status quo, and there is an intermediate scenario, which is the one you describe in your paper, and there is a more ambitious scenario, taking us perhaps a bit beyond the immediate as well. So these would be our recommendations. But again, thanks also to all the other teams. They were really great proposals. They got us thinking, and please continue working and thinking about these topics.
Well, congratulations from me, from the futurEU team, to Elena and Neslihan for this great achievement. Thank you so much to the judges. I really want to thank all the semifinalists that made it so far. You made this semifinal a great one. Well, Neslihan and Elena, tomorrow you have your job cut out for you. I would like to thank the judges for their insights and for their feedback. Thank you all for joining us now, but I invite you all to stream the second semifinal on the CIVICA YouTube channel, so you can find out who the second finalist for tomorrow will be. A big thank you also to our audience. Congratulations all. Congratulations, Neslihan and Elena, and thank you. Goodbye.